Hey guys, William here, and today we will be looking at the Shawshank Redemption. The movie opens with a shot of a man sitting in a car outside a home, with a drink in his hand and a gun at his side. The scene shifts to a view of a courthouse where a banker from Portland, Andy Dufresne, is getting grilled by a lawyer for murdering his wife and the man she was with. Andy's apathetic behavior leads the judge to believe Andy is guilty. After some deliberation, Andy is convicted for 2 life sentences at Shawshank Prison. At the prison, Ellis Redding, more commonly known as Red, is being interviewed for parole after spending 20 years in prison. He claims to have been rehabilitated and changed, but the parole board rejects his parole. Meanwhile, the new prisoners arrive and Red and his friends place bets on who will be the first newbie to crack under the strain. Red places his bet on Andy while Haywood, another prisoner, places his bet on a prisoner he calls Fat Ass. The new inmates are greeted by Sam Norton, the warden of Shawshank. Norton tells the prisoners to not say the Lord's name in vain and blasphemy will not be tolerated. The rest of the rules, he says, they will figure out with time. Night time comes and the prisoners start antagonizing the new prisoners, trying to break their will. Haywood, in particular, taunts Fat Ass, who he placed the bet on. Fat Ass breaks down as Haywood mentions introducing him to some queers. The rest of the prisoners start chanting fresh fish. The commotion brings the guards over, and here we are properly introduced to Captain Hadley. Hadley warns Fat Ass to stop his sobbing, but he cannot, so Hadley pulls him out of his cell and mercilessly beats him. Fat Ass has to be sent to the infirmary. The next morning at breakfast, Andy sits near Red's table. He finds a maggot in his food which upon request he gives to an elderly inmate by the name of Brooks. But don't worry, he isn't creepy, as he gives the maggot to his pet bird named Jake. Haywood asks a fellow prisoner, who was working in the infirmary, about Fat Ass. We find out he didn't make it because the doctor had already left for the night and wasn't coming back. Andy, who is sitting close to Red, wonders out loud what the man's name was. Haywood shuts him down, saying it doesn't matter anymore. Later on, at the showers, Andy meets Boggs, who is interested in Andy, but Andy doesn't reciprocate. A voiceover from Red, who is narrating the entire story, tells us that for a month Andy mostly kept to himself, but one day, he approaches Red and asks him if he can smuggle a rock hammer for Andy, since Red is known to smuggle things into the prison. Red jokingly asks Andy if he wants to dig out of the prison with it. Andy laughs this off. When asked what's so funny, he implies Red will get the joke when he sees the hammer. He says he wants the hammer because he is a rock hound and loves polishing rocks. Red warns Andy about Boggs, who is the leader of a group called the Sisters. Red says the Sisters are known as salters. Red gets the rock hammer for Andy and he understands the joke since the hammer is really small and would take too long to dig through with. One day, while working in laundry, Andy gets followed by Boggs into a secluded room in which the Sisters are waiting for him. They subdue him as Andy gets assaulted. For the next 2 years, Andy would spend time working in the laundry and trying to fend off the Sisters. He succeeds sometimes but doesn't most of the time. One day, Norton announces that the license plate factory needed resurfacing and the volunteers would earn special privileges. Red, through his connections, is able to bag the job alongside Haywood, Andy and company. One morning, Andy and the boys are hard at work on the roof when Andy overhears a conversation Hadley is having. Hadley remorselessly mentions his brother dying and leaving him an inheritance. Hadley is complaining about an estate tax on the inheritance when Andy approaches him and brazenly asks Hadley if he trusts his wife.
Listen,
Hadley takes hold of Andy and holds him
hold
off
on,
the
stop,
edge
just
of the
stop, bro.
roof. Andy quickly says he
bro.
can help Hadley keep the inheritance by claiming it as a one-time gift to his wife, tax-free. Andy's boldness pays off when Hadley takes him up on his offer, and in exchange the prisoners are able to enjoy some refreshments. Hadley offers Andy a beer, but Andy doesn't partake, instead watching the others with a smile on his face. Some days later, the prisoners are enjoying the movie Gilda when Andy, who is also looking on happily, asks Red for a poster of Rita Hayworth, which Red assures Andy he can have. On his way back from the theater, Andy is seized by the Sisters and is brutally beaten. He has to be hospitalized. Boggs, satisfied from a job well done, makes his way back to his cell where he finds Hadley and a fellow guard waiting for him. Hadley leaves Boggs handicapped. Boggs is then transferred to a minimum security prison where he spends the rest of his days drinking from a straw. The Sisters don't bother Andy ever again. Red decides that as a welcome back present and repayment for the beers, he and the other prisoners would get rocks for Andy. While working outside, the prisoners are able to sneak in some rocks for Andy. Back from the hospital, Andy finds those rocks and the poster of Rita Hayworth waiting for him in his cell. Andy's increasing popularity gets the attention of Norton. During an inspection, Norton visits Andy's cell where he finds Andy reading the Bible. Norton and Andy recite some Bible lines as Hadley searches through the cell. Norton looks disapprovingly at the poster of Rita Hayworth in Andy's cell but says exceptions can be made and leaves with a parting message to Andy, saying salvation lies within while referring to the Bible. Andy is later brought into Norton's office where Norton assigns Andy to work with Brooks in the library. Andy is skeptical as to why he is given this job since Brooks tells him he has never had a partner. Andy soon finds out that working in the library is a cover for Andy's actual job, to help the prison guards with their financial planning. Andy also, with the consent of Norton, starts writing letters, once a week, to the state senate, requesting funds to replenish the library. However, he gets no response for a long time. In the meantime, Brooks, after 50 years, gets parole. He doesn't take the news too well as Andy and Red find him pointing a knife at Haywood's throat. He cries that this is the only way he can stay in prison, at home. Andy convinces him to let go of the knife and the prisoners later discuss that Brooks has become institutionalized. Red ominously states they send you for life and that is exactly what they take. Brooks says goodbye to Jake and walks out of the prison gates, finally a free man. He finds a job as a bagger at a grocery shop but cannot adjust to a life of liberty without the prison or Jake. He writes and sends a letter to Andy explaining things and hangs himself. Back at the prison, 6 years of letters finally pay off when Andy receives a supply of books and $200 for the library, and a note requesting him to stop sending letters. Andy instead vows to double down on his efforts. In the midst of all the books, Andy finds a phonographic record of Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro. Andy locks himself inside Norton's office and begins playing the music, which he broadcasts to the entire prison. The prisoners listen to the music in awe and Red remarks how every prisoner at Shawshank in that moment felt free. Eventually though, Norton arrives with more guards and he orders Andy to turn off the music. In an act of defiance, Andy instead increases the volume of the music which earns him 2 weeks in confinement. When finally out, Andy is asked by Red why he did this, to which Andy replies it was for hope. Red disagrees with Andy and says he should get used to living without hope at Shawshank. Andy retorts that that was what Brooks did. Red gets annoyed and leaves the table. After 30 years in prison, Red is up for parole again. He again claims to have changed but without much enthusiasm. He gets rejected. For his 30 years, Andy gifts Red a harmonica while Andy gets a poster of Marilyn Monroe for his 10. After 4 years, the Senate provides Andy with a budget, large enough to rebuild the entire library, which is named after Brooks. Andy also starts helping inmates with their education. In the meantime, in a program called Inside Out, Norton uses prison labor to work on community projects, where the free labor he provides allows him to outbid other contractors. This allows him to attain bribes and make shady deals. Behind the scenes, Andy is managing the finances by laundering the money. As Andy explains to Red, he is laundering the money using the alias, Randall Stevens, who is the person the paper trail would lead to if the cops came sniffing. Andy manages to get a license, birth certificate and more for Randy Boy. 18 years after Andy gets incarcerated, Tommy Williams, a young wisecracking punk, is convicted on a failed burglary attempt. At lunch, Tommy narrates the anecdote of his robbery fail to Red's group, who immediately take to him and befriend him. However, Andy does suggest Tommy should try for another line of work since he doesn't seem to be very good at burglary. Later on at the library, Tommy asks Andy for help to achieve his high school equivalency diploma. Andy accepts on the condition that Tommy gives it his best. Tommy agrees and Andy starts teaching him. While taking the test, Tommy appears frustrated and thinks he doesn't do well, so he crumples up the paper and storms off. Andy, however, retrieves the exam and mails it. Tommy later tells Red he fears disappointing Andy, but Red assures him Andy is proud of his progress. Tommy then asks Red what Andy was in for and Red tells him Andy apparently murdered his wife and her lover. Tommy listens, shocked. He later tells Andy and Red about a criminal, Elmo Blatch, with whom he had shared a prison cell. Elmo had laughingly told Tommy he snuffed some Gold Pro and the woman he was with, and that the woman's husband had taken the fall. Andy, dazed, takes this information to Norton. However, Norton informs Andy that Tommy is probably lying, and it wouldn't do Andy any good anyway. Andy desperately mentions he wouldn't reveal Norton's crimes if he got out. Norton gets livid and orders Andy to be thrown into confinement for a month. Tommy receives his high school equivalency diploma and some guard passes the news on to Andy, who smiles. Later, Tommy is led outside the prison building, where Norton is waiting for him. He asks Tommy if he is willing to testify about Andy's innocence. Tommy replies with a yes, which then makes Norton smile and look up. As Tommy looks around, Hadley shoots Tommy. Tommy's reason of death is put to an escape attempt. Norton relays the news to Andy and threatens to take away Andy's library privileges if he doesn't work for Norton. Andy is released from confinement. However, As Red speaks with him, he depressingly talks about dreaming of living in Zihuatanejo. He tells Red he feels responsible for his wife's death because he didn't pay enough attention to her, which is why she turned towards other prospects. And he also makes Red promise him that, once out, he would go to a hayfield in Buxton, and retrieve a package Andy left under a large oak tree under a stone wall. Red agrees. Red later finds out from Haywood, Andy had also asked for a 6-foot rope. Alarmed for his friend, Red spends the night sleepless and afraid. The next morning, Andy doesn't respond to the roll call. Red looks on, fearing the worst. The guard exclaims that Andy better be sick or dead in there. When Andy still doesn't respond, the guard walks up to Andy's cell. What he sees leaves him speechless. At the same time, Norton finds Andy's shoes instead of his own. He starts to sense something off when the alarms go off to signal a missing prisoner. Norton rushes to Andy's prison cell to find it empty. He also brings Red over and demands an explanation. Red insists he doesn't know where Andy is. Enraged, Norton starts throwing Andy's rocks at the walls, Red, Hadley and the posters. However, to Norton's, Red's and Hadley's surprise, the rock goes through the poster and punches a hole. Norton rips off the poster to expose a tunnel in the wall. The guards search for Andy, but it is too late. They only find clothes, soap and a rock hammer. It is revealed Andy had been trying to write his name when a piece of the wall came off. Andy realizes he can dig through the wall, so he asks Red for the poster of Rita Hayworth to cover the hole. He works on it in the middle of the night every night for 19 years. Andy hides the dirt and rocks by dropping them in the courtyard. After Tommy's death, on one stormy night, Andy is as usual finishing work for Norton, who tells him to hurry up. Thus, Norton doesn't even look as Andy places some strange files in Norton's locker. Andy wears Norton's clothes under his prisoner clothes. He even wears Norton's shoes, which nobody notices. In his cell, Andy uses the rope to tie Norton's incriminating documents to himself and goes through the tunnel. He uses the thunder to mask the sounds of him breaking the sewage pipe, which he crawls through for 500 yards. Andy uses his alias, Randall Stevens, to withdraw $370,000 from Norton's pocket by visiting various banks. At one of the banks he asks the staff to mail a package to a local newspaper. The package contained proof of Norton and Hadley being crooked AF. Police make their way to Shawshank. Norton, after reading a newspaper exposing him, opens his safe, which he hadn't been able to do till then. He finds Andy's Bible. The Bible had a note saying, "You were right, Warden, salvation does lie within." Norton flips through the pages to find out how Andy hid the rock hammer. Hadley looks on apprehensively as police arrive at the gates. Hadley is arrested, who Red says cried like a little girl in the back of a police car. Norton stares at the commotion and knows it is only a matter of time. Norton pulls out a gun and points it at the door. However, when the police start knocking at the door, he realizes it is over and ends things right there. At Red's next parole hearing, he repents his actions not because he is in jail, but because he knows he was wrong. He then asks the parole board to stop wasting his time. Red is released on parole. Similar to Brooks, he has trouble adjusting outside. He also considers closing his story like Brooks closed his, but he decides to act on his promise to Andy and goes to that hayfield. He finds the package and inside cash and a letter from Andy reminding him of Zihuatanejo. Red crosses the border to Mexico and walks along a beach where he finds Andy working on a boat. Andy looks up and the two friends are reunited. They embrace as a voiceover from Red tells us he finally feels hope. This film is an all-timer. There is no solitary scene you can point to and say was definitely the best, although I did enjoy the rooftop scene. I wish I had a narrating voice like Morgan Freeman's. Sadly, I don't. Let me know what scene you enjoyed the most in the comments. Thank you for watching and I'll see you guys in the next one.